We are very pleased to be joined by the Director of Scouting, Doug Wilson Jr. Jr., first of all, thank you so much for the time. It's really nice to catch up with you. But how are things going as you lead into another draft this upcoming summer?
Thanks, Nola. Yeah, so far so good. Just got back from Buffalo where we had our first in-person combine in 3 years. So that was nice to see all the guys again and kind of get a little bit back to normalcy for that and go through our interviews. So right now we have about 3 weeks of lead time, just finishing up a couple more interviews and a lot of Zoom calls, and then get back together with our scouts at the end of the month. So yeah, it's a pretty busy season for us right now.
Yeah, and you're very kind to give us a little bit of your time. This is the busy season for you and your group. Just finished up the scouting combine. I want to ask about the scouting combine because often we think of the NFL scouting combine, and these are basically finished products that are going to step into the NFL and play right away. In hockey, it's a little bit different of an animal. Maybe a couple guys will play in the NHL next year, but most guys will go either back to junior, go to college, go back to Europe. So what can you surmise from the scouting combine? What do you get away from this event?
Well, it's fascinating because you brought up the football combine, right? So when you go through football testing and they have the 40 time and the bench and the squats, and they can actually do, football related drills, shuttles and, catching and throwing, et cetera. We don't necessarily get to do that. We don't get to do any on ice testing. That was mostly at the halfway mark of the season at like the All-American game, the top prospects game, et cetera. So when we go to this combine, it's a lot more projection. I mean, you'll have guys who just finished their season, 3 days prior, competing against guys who finished their season 2.5 months ago. So you have to kind of take all of that information with a grain of salt. Mike Potenza actually ran the combine this year in charge of all the strength and conditioning coaches. So that was a huge benefit for us, for him to kind of basically lay the groundwork for the first combine in 3 years. So Potsy flew out with his team, with Steve Delestrio, and they did a great job. But yeah, we interviewed, just under 80 players, I want to say, in person. And then we have a lot more Zooms coming up here too with some other European players. So it was nice to kind of see the guys again and watching them work out and see how they fight through the bike test. You forget how tough the Wingate is and the VO2 and things like that. So the last two groups of the draft, they got lucky. They didn't have to do it. So we're back to normal now.
I don't know if you've ever personally done the VO2 testing, but we always hear about it because of how physically straining it is. Why is that the big talking point from a workout standpoint leading into the draft? Is it really that difficult, how it's cracked up to be?
Yeah, it's funny. So you got two different bike tests. You got the VO2 test, and you just pretty much trying to see what your lung capacity is. And then the Wingate, it's a 30-second test. So you're sitting there thinking, the Wingate's going to be easy, the 30-second test. But the problem is you have to maintain. So these guys who've never done it before, right? They try and get up to like max threshold in the first 5 seconds. Then they realize they got 25 more seconds of this, and then the puke bucket comes to the left. And it's, it's funny to see how the guys react differently to it. At the end of the day, we take the numbers and kind of work with it through Mike Potenza and see, how this group of 18-year-olds did compared to, our current group of NHLers at the time. But it is always funny to see the guys doing the Wingate for the first time and realizing it's the longest 25 seconds of their life once they get back on the bike.
You mentioned Mike Potenza, strength and conditioning coach for the San Jose Sharks. You said he ran it, his group ran it. Is that a benefit to the organization, given the fact that you've got your strength coach working with these prospects one-on-one?
Yeah, it's fantastic because the way it's set up at the combine is they have like a long table with all the strength coaches from all the teams, and they sit there and they've got their laptops and they're watching certain guys. But because Mike Potenza is running it, he was actually on the court, walking through with each of the prospects, making sure that they're not cheating on the line for the vertical jump or the long jump, making sure that they're doing the bike test normal for everybody. So he got to be kind of more up close and personal, and he also got to make sure like all the testing was exactly what he wanted. So it was really nice to be able to have that. I mean, Potsy's a heck of a strength coach with a great reputation. So that was a huge benefit for us that he was running the entire combine for all the NHL teams.
So we're recording this interview mid-June. The draft is going to be early July out in Montreal. So over the next couple of weeks, how do things look like they're going to shake out for yourself personally and for the group as you guys try to be as ready as possible for the draft?
Yeah, so we do Zooms right now every day. I mean, it's funny because Zoom is based in San Jose and we've been using them forever. And then obviously what happened the last couple of years, nothing really changed on our end from the workflow. So this is kind of how we've been doing it. This is my 6th year running the draft. And for the next few weeks, I mean, our list is pretty much in order, but it's pretty much, crossing T's and dotting the I's in regards to, do we have background checks on everyone? Are there any other injuries we need to know about? Doing some crossover video. So we have a Zoom every week with our North American amateur group. We have a Zoom every week with our European amateur group. We're going to all get together as a group again for about 7 days leading up to the draft. So it's really just preparation. But at this point in the process, our list is effectively 95% done.
Going quickly back to the combine, going back to all the prep that leads into the draft, beyond physical testing, the interview process. I know you aren't going to interview every single prospect over a weekend in Buffalo, but you have to do this stuff over the last 12 months. But how important is the interview process for these players?
Yeah, I mean, in Buffalo, I think we only spoke to 2 players that we hadn't spoken to already throughout the season. So it's nice to put like a name to face, et cetera. But our area guys do a great job of interviewing, players throughout the season. And I think that's the big thing. These kids go to Buffalo and they're at the rink and they're going to meet with 32 teams and only, 20 minutes each. And they're all going to be asked the same questions or asked to watch the same video or do the same test. So for us, it's more, getting local area scouts of different areas to see these players. Because most of the players have already been interviewed by our local guy. So it's really just another, data point for us, getting to finally see them face to face and meeting other people in our organization and kind of getting some crossover work. So Buffalo, it's a nice ad for the interviews, but it's more of just the entirety of the process of when we started talking to them, 7-8 months ago.
So the last 2 drafts have been virtual. You've worked with your scouts. You've been over to Europe. I know the U18s were in Germany this past year, but how excited are you to get back in person and get to reward your scouting staff as well beyond just the draft itself? You get to be around these guys, enjoy dinners and enjoy time together. How excited are you to get everybody back together?
Yeah, it's so great to get everyone back together. And something people don't realize too is like the NHL draft is very rare in the sense that you bring all your scouts. So at our table in Montreal, there's going to be 20 of us at the table, and there's 32 tables all right next to each other. Whereas the NBA, NFL, and Major League Baseball draft, they usually do them from their hometowns, and they might have a representative just on the court or in the arena for it. So with ours, there's just so much more buzz, and things happen at the draft. I mean, you can walk. I remember a couple instances where we made trades with teams at the draft. And, they were just sitting at the table next to us. And that's kind of how it works. So it's a totally different dynamic. I'm so excited to get back to it, especially Montreal. It's, the draft's supposed to have been in Montreal the last 3 years. And one of our scouts, longtime scout, Gilles Cote, who's been with us forever, he covers the Quebec League and he's retiring this year. So to have his final draft there in Montreal is going to be fantastic. So I can't wait to see what he wears. He's got the best style on our staff. So it's just an exciting time. We're all looking forward to it.
I want to hear reports about the weekend. That was kind of a follow-up to my next question. Going again to Montreal, this is, the heart and soul of the sport, really going back up to Canada, being able to celebrate the sport and a new crop of players coming into the fold. Is there any restaurants, specific places that you're excited to go back and kind of revisit as you'll return back to Montreal?
Yeah, well, Montreal's such a good town. My uncle won 4 Stanley Cups in that town in the 70s with the Canadiens, Murray Wilson. So I think we've got a pretty good history of where to go in that city. I will keep that under wraps of where we're going. So, but there's some good spots.
Don't want to divulge too much information. I understand that. With the team picking this year at number 11 overall, a little bit different than last year. You were in the top 10 last year. And I know you have William Eklund very high on your board last year, and he fell to you guys. How does the approach change this year going into a new draft year on the outside of that top 10? Does the philosophy change? Does the approach change at all?
Not really. I mean, we tend to go with best player available. I think it makes sense because, in hockey, we're drafting 18-year-olds, and it's very rare for these players to go directly onto the NHL team. So you have no idea what your roster is going to look like, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years out when these players are actually coming and helping you. When you're picking 7, you are probably looking at players that will help your team sooner than later. William Eklund played 9 games with us last season, and he's coming in to compete with us for this upcoming year. I think 11 is going to be fascinating because there's a few more facets in it where if 1 or 2 guys drop, they could be in the same page as Eklund. If they don't drop, I still like that crop that's there, but we're kind of waiting more for what's going to happen in front of us at 11, whereas at 7, we were able to be a little bit more proactive. The way the draft is shaping out, though, I really like where we're sitting. I'm sure everyone is going to say that, but I think at 11, you're right in the mix of that kind of, there's the guys that are going to go top 3 or 4. But in this year's draft, I think, the next, say, 7, 8, 9 picks, it's going to be fascinating what order it goes into. And we're right in that mix. So I think we're going to get a really good player at 11. And we just got to wait a little bit more time to see who falls to us.
We're talking to Doug Wilson, Jr., Director of Scouting for the Sharks. You talked about in-person drafts, making trades with tables, maybe sitting right next to you. And maybe it's not you guys involved in the trade market, but do you expect a little bit more activation when it comes to draft day trades than maybe what we've seen over the last couple of years, given the fact that it's been virtual?
I think you'll see a little bit more activity in regards to the trade market, just because everyone is there together. Every team is going to get to Montreal 4 or 5 days early. You'll see, players being interviewed 3 or 4 days before the draft, and you're curious, oh, this guy went into that room, or this guy's going over there, things like that. And I think there might be a little bit more jockeying for position around the draft this season. But having said that, when we looked at it, the amount of trades that happened the last 2 virtual drafts was roughly the same as when they were live drafts. So, even though everyone's going to be there, I think at the end of the day, every draft has roughly the same amount of trades. Maybe there's a little bit more talk this year, but yeah, not expecting anything too crazy.
Okay, go back to picking at number 11 overall. I want to ask you, there's such a value for center icemen this day and age, centers who can skate, of course, defense as well. Is there a philosophy change, an approach change when you're looking to draft at 11 again, and whether you're going to take a center iceman, a winger, or a defenseman? Does anything change? And is it a best player available approach, or are you guys trying to now draft for need at this point?
Yeah, you know what? I've never really been a huge fan of drafting for need, but best player available, you have to take into consideration that some positions sometimes are more, important or more rare, I guess, is a better way to say it. So, Shane Wright is 6'1", and he's a right shot center, and, Cooley and Slavkovsky, they're all high-end guys, and they're going to be in the mix for first overall. That's what happens, right? If you get a premium position and you got the size and the speed and the IQ, you're going to go high. When you're picking at 11, you really rely on your area scouts way more, just to make sure that everybody is in the right place. Some wingers can play center, some centers can play wing, some D play their offside, so I don't think at 11 we're really position specific, because you don't want to overdraft a person just for, what position they play. But I would say that when you look at best player available, there is some weight to, centers and D versus wings and goalies, things like that. So it's just another data point in there. But at 11, you go best player available and go from there.
What about size? What is the philosophy on a player and how he is built? Because going back to the last handful of drafts, you guys have not been deterred by a player's size. Look at William Eklund last year, Ozzy Weisbach. These are players that are under 6 feet tall, but that does fit the modern game. So from a size philosophy, do you guys have any approach when it comes to how a player is built?
We look more at athleticism than, I think some people, when they say size, they're talking about height, but you have to take into consideration how athletic these guys are, how strong their trunks are, how strong their legs are. The first draft I ran, our first pick was Josh Norris, and he was a freak athlete. He won every competition at the combine. That same draft, we took Scott Reedy, and Scott's, a 6'2" right shot center, and he blew out the combine too. And he's a big body. Mario Ferraro was that draft. He's not tall, but if you want to go tell Mario Ferraro he's not strong, be my guest. So I think sometimes it gets overblown in regards to height. And I think it's more, strength, athleticism, and ability. We do have a couple of guys, Thomas Bordeleau and Ozzy Weisblot, etc. But when you look at it, that was really just from the one draft, the 2020 draft. And that's what that draft class gave you, right? So you don't want to go out of your way to try and force things. And the 2020 draft, I feel like not just the Sharks, but overall in the NHL, you're going to see quite a few mid-sized guys make it because that's what that draft class gave you. Last season we took William Eklund because he was best player. And then later in the draft, we're very excited about Gannon Larocque, a 6'2" D-man, and Artem Guriev, a 6'4" D-man, etc. So we're not as concerned about height as we are athleticism, strength, ability to be knocked off pucks, elusiveness, and just not forcing things at the draft table. Every draft brings you different types of players. That's
an interesting point to say that draft gave you that type of player, and it's not just you're going into the draft. We want this type of player. It's kind of what it gives you. This will be your 6th draft in your current position. How have things changed for you personally over the last handful of years? And do you feel like it's different for you going into now, again, your 6th draft?
Yeah, it's been interesting. I mean, I learned a lot from Tim Burke in my 4 years, just learning under him prior. And he's got some unbelievable philosophies, and he's fantastic with player development. And what I've kind of learned is every player you draft, you have to have a program for. You have to know, why are we picking this player, and what is our plan to help this player become the best player he can over the next 3 or 4 seasons. I think it's been fascinating not having a combine the last 2 years because we weren't necessarily allowed to see these players' physical testing. So it's always curious, Brandon Coe we drafted, and he's 6'4" and he can jump through the roof and he's super athletic. You're always curious if we had a combine that year, would Brandon Coe have gone way higher? Because 32 teams would have been able to see him perform athletically. And you can say the opposite about some other players too. So this is kind of like the 3rd iteration where we're back to being able to see guys in person. We got to go to every single rink, got to go overseas, things like that. And I think the biggest thing I've learned is you have to stay focused on acquiring the best player that's going to help you in the future win a Stanley Cup, and make sure every player you draft, there's a specific program and plan in place to help them succeed.
You brought up Brandon Coe. He's coming off a fabulous season. He returned back to the OHL, Overage Player of the Year, Sharks Prospect of the Year. What do you think about his season going back to the Ontario League and the way he approached it as a little bit of an older player who now had a taste of the professional game, but then was returning back to his junior league?
My biggest impression from Brandon this year was how consistent he was. I think he'll be the first one to tell you that in his actual draft year, he was not consistent. I mean, again, for a 6'4", 25-goal scorer in the OHL who played in the top prospects game, there was no rationale as to why he went in the 4th round. And I think the only thing you can think of is he was very inconsistent. He had some fantastic games his draft year, and he had some very bad games. And then he comes to the American League, and he looks the part because he's 6'4", but he still is so young. He scored 1 goal in 17 games. He was healthy scratched a lot. I think it was a huge learning lesson. And to go back this year and pretty much just say, hey, I'm taking over my career now and let's go here. He was consistent all year long, and he had a phenomenal playoffs. And I'm really proud of Brandon. I think he just took his career, kind of like bull by the horns, and was consistent all season. And I can't wait to see him come to San Jose now. You only had that one time, right, to see those guys play American League at that age. So it'll be fascinating to see how that transitions to his next, full season pro.
Yeah, it was as unique of a situation as you'll ever see. And hopefully we won't have to deal with anything like that again because it was impacted by COVID. Going back to that 2020 draft, 9 forwards drafted in that draft, a franchise record. Going into this draft, I believe you selected 9 players last year as well. Is it about volume still? Are you guys trying to take as many swings at the plate as possible, or is there any sort of philosophical change going into this upcoming draft?
Well, last year's draft was different. We drafted, I want to say 5 players with OHL roots, and the OHL didn't play last season. So we kind of saw that as something we wanted to take a few swings at. And this year's draft, I think you want to take swings, but you want to get the right players. An example I kind of go back to is Daniil Gushkin. Like, we traded up for Daniil Gushkin. We didn't necessarily want to move 2 picks to move up, but when you have a player rated as high as we had Gush rated, you have to go get him. So, I don't think we go into the draft saying we need tons and tons of guys, but the 5 years prior to the 2020 draft, we had the lowest total number of draft picks of any NHL team. So I think it was super important for us to load up. But now we have defensemen, we have, Benny Goodrow, we signed Strauss Mann, we have some forwards. So I think we're in a really good spot right now to just focus on best player available, since we have some depth at all different positions.
We've talked about that kind of cycle that occurs when you draft a player and then the couple of years proceeding his draft, eventually getting to the pro level, AHL, and then NHL. We've got a big crop of players joining the fold potentially this upcoming season. We talked about Thomas Bordeleau, played a little bit with the Sharks last year, and with the Barracuda, Tristan Robbins potentially, Ozzy Weisblatt, Gushtin, as you mentioned, all from this 2020 class, also Brandon Coe. Are you excited to see what these guys are all about now that they've matured, developed back in junior, and now will embark on their pro careers?
Yeah, I'm really excited. I think now, this is the part of the time where players go from their junior careers to their pro careers, and so they get handed off within the organization. So, our scouting staff drafts them, and then we hand them off to Tim Burke to help develop them. Now they're being handed off to the coaching staff. And John McCarthy actually went out last year as part of our player development staff and got to see all of these players in their hometowns and playing juniors. And with Johnny Mack as the new Barracuda head coach, he already has significant experience working with some of these guys on the player development side, which I think is crucial, because now he knows exactly, what to expect. And these guys know there's nowhere to hide. Johnny's already seen them play juniors, right? So I think this is going to be a really good class that's going to be challenged. And I think Tim Burke has done a great job with all of them developmentally. And now it's our job to turn to the next draft class, and their careers are now in Johnny Mack and Boogie's hands. So here we go.
Well, this is a little bit of a Barracuda-centric podcast, and you mentioned John McCarthy. One of the big things when this announcement was made, and this is no knock on anybody who was there prior, but John is a great hockey mind, and he's going to be perfect to really develop these players even more so and continue to push them towards the NHL. From your experience with John, both of as a player and now in a coaching realm, why do you think he'll be a perfect, bridge between drafting, developing AHL, and then NHL?
Well, Johnny Mack was on the road last year, and he went out and he visited all of our drafted players. So he went out and he saw Ozzy Weisblatt. He saw Tristan Robbins live. He saw Ethan Cardwell. He saw Goosh and Brandon Coe, just to name a few guys. So he knows where they came from, what their backgrounds are, what leagues they played in, what their deficiencies are, strengths, weaknesses, etc. So there's no cold handoff here from scouts to coaches. He knows exactly what to expect. And those players in turn know that Johnny Mack has seen them and has history with them. So there's the term I kind of use is there's nowhere to hide, right? So these guys can't come in and pretend to be different types of guys. Johnny's already seen them play. And I think for Johnny Mack in particular, that's going to be huge, because right off the gate, he's going to know, I think these guys could play well together. I think these guys, have different skill sets, or these guys have similar, so let's break them up. I think it's just going to give us that extra little bounce to start guys off earlier in the roles that they need to be in to succeed, as opposed to, waiting 10, 12, 15 games through the Cuda season and be like, okay, let's see if there's any chemistry here. I think Johnny Mack's already got a good feel of who to play with who to get the best out of players. And that gives us a leg up in the player development.
We chatted a little bit via text a handful of weeks back. You were overseas. The U18s were in Germany this year, and that's a nation that's grown as a hockey nation over the last, 10 years or so. But what do you take away from that tournament? I know hockey fans are really into the U20 tournament, the World Junior Championships. U18 is big, though, for the draft. So what do you take from a sample size like that, kind of a condensed sample size, we're seeing players against their peers competing at a really high level?
Yeah, it's the best of the best of the draft eligibles. I mean, for my own personal job, that the U18 tournament is more important than the U20 tournament. The U20 tournament would be more important for player development coaches and Tim Burke, our assistant GM, to see how our prospects stack up to other teams' prospects. But the U18, it's fantastic. I mean, and anything can happen. Sweden beat USA in the gold medal game. USA outshot Sweden 51-15. I mean, it's fun to see. It's always nice to see these guys compete against each other, who steps up. And it also gives you a little bit of insight into the players for the following draft, because there are some 16 and 17-year-olds on those teams. So it's a great way to see, okay, here's the culmination of this whole season. Here's what we have to look forward to for next year. So it's just a really good end of season tournament. Having said that, those guys all played 40, 50, 60 game seasons. So it's just a little piece of, all the data points that you have. But, to see guys step up in big moments, I mean, we're trying to win a Stanley Cup, right? So that's what you're looking for, guys who step up in big moments.
Every class a little bit different. They all are unique in their own right. How would you describe this class, this 2022 class?
It's a good class in the sense of there's different pockets of the draft that you really, really like. I think positionally, we've been pretty spoiled with some high-end goaltenders, taken pretty high over the last few years. Last year we took Ben Goodrow, and there were two other goalies taken in the first round. There were some other goalies taken. So I'm not so sure you're going to see that as much this year. There's some good goaltenders in the draft, but I'd be surprised if any win as high as they have previously. But having said that, this year's draft has a lot more physicality, a lot more size, and I think it has a lot of depth. Like I said, there's different pockets in the draft that I feel like if we can get into certain pockets, you're going to have a lot of really good players to choose from. And from that perspective, I'm really excited.
Talking quickly about the goaltending position, Ben Goodrow, you mentioned you guys took him a year ago, highly touted prospect within the organization. You brought in Strauss Mann as a kid who played at Michigan, went overseas this past year. Never say never, but you solidified the goaltending position from a prospect standpoint a little bit. You've got, of course, the kid in Denver as well and a couple of guys under contract. So going into the draft, would it be a surprise for Sharks fans to see you guys select a goaltender?
Well, no, we took 9 forwards one time, right? So maybe we take 9 goalies this year. I got no idea. Maybe I'm just playing quiet with you and I love every goalie and we're taking a goalie at 11. Who knows? But no, I think that there's some good goaltenders this year, but they're going to need some work and some development. So we're fortunate to have Evgeny Nabokov. So I work closely with Navi on the goaltenders from the draft perspective. So there's definitely goalies on our draft list. And I just think that this year, more than the last few years, it's going to be what does your organization, look for in the goaltending position? And we might gravitate more towards one type of goalie. Another team might gravitate towards another type of goalie. So I'm not so sure that the rankings of goalies this year are going to be followed, 1, 2, 3, 4, however they're ranked by Central or by the Sharks or by Public, etc. But there's definitely some good goalies out there. I think it's just more what type of goalie do you gravitate towards?
Well, you saw it in the Eastern Conference Finals, 2 of the best goalies, as it's at least the public opinion, and I think the overall thought is, and they're much different in terms of their styles of play. Speaking of what's going on currently in the NHL, we look at the Avs, we look at the Lightning. That's going to be our Stanley Cup final. Is there anything that you take away from these organizations? I know it's a copycat league from a drafting standpoint, what they've been able to do to build their teams up. Do you take anything away from other teams, or is that something teams do not do?
Oh, I think you have to. I mean, the biggest thing this year, I think, is Tampa Bay, that they have found different ways to win in different games and different series. I mean, this Tampa Bay Lightning team that we're watching right now is totally different from the Tampa Bay team that's won the last 2 years. I mean, it's incredible. And they're still winning. You got to tip your cap to them. I mean, they won a Stanley Cup in a bubble. They won a Stanley Cup in a season with no fans. And now they're in the finals again in a normal 82-game season. I mean, they have just gone through so much adversity, and they've found a way to be a diverse team, and they've lost players and they've brought in other players. But like you said, at the end of the day, their core players they drafted internally. They drafted Vasilevsky, they drafted Kucherov, They drafted Braden Point, Steven Stamkos, and even the young guys coming up, they drafted Ross Colton. So I think at the end of the day, when you look at how many high-end picks some of these teams have, I mean, Edmonton, I want to say, had 10 first-round picks were in their top 16 of scoring, and 5 of those guys were top 5 overall. And then you look at this Colorado team, and I believe they have 5 guys who are taking top 5 as well. I mean, Makar, Bowen Byram, Rantanen, Landeskog, McKinnon. I mean, their depth guys, Andrew Cogliano was a first rounder, Valerie Nichushkin was a first rounder. I mean, it's easy to pinpoint how many guys on these teams were first round picks, and you need those guys to win. So theme wise, it's just you got to be able to win in different ways. I think that's important, but 2, you still need the talent, and you got to get the talent through the draft. That's how all these teams have done it.
Yeah, especially with the modern day salary cap, you've just got to draft and develop. It's really the only possible way to win, at least on a consistent basis. One more question for you before we do let you go, and thank you so much for the time. You personally, and you don't have to divulge anything, do you go into drafts with a wish list? Do you have something internally that you hope to accomplish?
I think every scout has 1 or 2 guys that they hope to leave the draft table with. So that's we're going to go with that.
I think that's fair. Everybody has a player maybe they're a little bit in love with, if you will. But
yeah.
Well, Doug Wilson Jr., we can't thank you enough for the time. Really do appreciate the insight as always. I know this is a very busy time of the year for you, so we wish you nothing but the best going into the draft. And again, thank you for the time.
Thanks, Dolly.